On a quiet October morning in a small town outside Sacramento, California, a woman named Claire Whitfield kissed her husband goodbye and walked out the front door for what everyone believed was an ordinary jog. She never came back. Her phone was later found abandoned on the side of a rural road, her earbuds still tangled in the grass beside it. For 22 days, the entire town searched for her, prayed for her, and feared the worst. But Claire wasn't lost. She wasn't hurt. She was watching. From a distance, hidden in plain sight, she was watching the man she had built an entire life with, waiting to see who he truly became the moment he believed she was gone. What she found in those 22 days would break something inside her that no apology could ever fully repair, and what she didn't yet know was that the woman standing beside her husband hadn't arrived in his life by accident at all. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand why Claire did what she did, you have to understand what it feels like to slowly stop trusting the person you promised your life to. Claire met Daniel at 24, at a mutual friend's barbecue, and from the very first conversation, she felt like she had found someone who truly saw her. He remembered the small things, the way she liked her coffee, the songs that made her cry, the stories she only told once. Within a year they were engaged, and within 2 they were married, building a home together in the suburbs, complete with a golden retriever and a life that looked, from the outside, like everything Claire had ever wanted. For years, she believed she had found the kind of love that was supposed to last forever. But love, when it starts to fracture, rarely breaks all at once. It happens quietly, in small moments that seem forgivable on their own, but add up over time into something unmistakable. Claire's sister, Sophie, remembers a shift in Daniel around their 4th year of marriage, a distance that crept into his voice, late nights that stretched longer than any job could reasonably demand. Claire noticed it too, though she spent months convincing herself it meant nothing. She told herself he was tired, that work was simply harder than it used to be, that the man who once memorized her favorite songs hadn't changed at all. It's a particular kind of pain, choosing not to see something because seeing it would mean admitting your whole world might not be what you thought. Eventually, the small inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. A hotel charge on a night he swore he was working late. A second phone he thought she didn't know existed. Messages that painted a picture of a man living 2 separate lives, one with her and one hidden just far enough away that he assumed she would never find it. Claire didn't confront him right away. Instead, she sat with the pain quietly, the way people do when they aren't ready to lose something, even after they already know it's gone. She spent months gathering pieces of the truth, not because she wanted to punish him, but because she needed to understand exactly how much of her marriage had been real, and how much of it had simply been a performance for her benefit. What Claire wanted more than anything wasn't proof for a courtroom or a confrontation in front of witnesses. She wanted to see him when he thought no one was watching, because that's the only version of a person that ever tells the truth. So she made a decision that would change everything, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to know the man she loved without the mask he wore for her. She disappeared, not to punish Daniel, but to finally see him clearly, without performance, without an audience, without the version of himself he presented only when she was in the room. It was the loneliest decision she had ever made, and also, in her mind, the only honest one left to her. The days that followed were harder on Claire than she had ever imagined. Watching from a distance, she saw Daniel cry on camera during a news interview, pleading for her safe return, his voice breaking in a way that once would have devastated her with worry. Now it only deepened the ache of watching someone she loved perform grief for an audience, while quietly building a life without her. Within days, his sadness gave way to something else entirely. Dinners with a coworker named Elena that stretched later into the evening, laughter that felt far too easy for a man supposedly consumed with fear for his missing wife. Each night she watched, a little more of the marriage she remembered dissolved into something she barely recognized. What Claire didn't understand yet, and wouldn't fully understand for months, was that Elena's presence in Daniel's life wasn't the random result of shared grief or convenient timing. Elena had chosen him, deliberately and carefully, long before Claire ever staged her disappearance, and everything that looked like comfort offered to a devastated husband was, in truth, a plan already well underway. Claire only saw the surface of it during those 19 nights of watching, the dinners, the late visits, the growing familiarity, never once suspecting that the woman easing her way into her marriage had a reason for being there that went back much further than either of them had let on. By the 19th day, Claire had seen enough to understand that this wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake made in grief. She sat outside her own home one evening, watching Daniel and Elena through the window, moving through her kitchen together, with an ease that told her everything words never could. In that moment, something in her shifted permanently, not into anger exactly, but into a kind of clarity, the quiet, aching certainty that comes when a person finally stops asking themselves what they did wrong and starts understanding what was simply never right to begin with. She didn't yet know how deliberate the whole thing had been. She only knew that she was done waiting to find out. 3 days later, Claire walked back into her own life the same way she had left it, quietly, without warning, and without giving Daniel the chance to prepare a version of the truth, softened enough for her to accept. She knocked on the door of the home they had shared for 6 years and waited, wanting to see, one final time, the look on his face the moment he understood that she knew everything. What followed was not the quiet, dignified ending either of them might have imagined. Daniel raised his voice before Claire even finished speaking, accusing her of ruining his reputation, of embarrassing him in front of the entire town, as though her disappearance had been the real betrayal and his affair simply a footnote beneath it. The separation that followed was nothing like the calm, mutual ending Claire had once hoped for during her quieter moments of grief. Daniel refused to leave the house for weeks, forcing Claire to stay with Sophie while lawyers exchanged increasingly hostile letters over shared accounts and property neither of them wanted to give up. He told mutual friends a version of events that painted Claire as unstable, a woman who had staged an elaborate disappearance out of paranoia rather than genuine betrayal, and for a while, some of those friends believed him. Court dates were postponed twice. Furniture was divided item by item in a mediation room that grew colder with every passing session, and by the time the divorce was finalized, nearly a year later, neither Claire nor Daniel had spoken a civil word to each other in months. What Claire didn't know, as she sat in that mediation room signing away 6 years of her life, was that Elena had already gotten exactly what she came for, and that her reasons for wanting it had almost nothing to do with Daniel at all. The full truth of why Elena had chosen this particular marriage to unravel wouldn't surface until months later, when a single photograph, buried in a box Claire had almost thrown away, forced her to reconsider everything she thought she understood about the woman who had helped end her marriage, and about a friendship from years earlier that Claire had long since stopped thinking about entirely. So we're left with the question this part of the story leaves behind. If someone set out to take something from you on purpose, would you want to know their reason, even if that reason forced you to look differently at your own past? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and stay close, because what Claire discovers next changes everything you think you know about how this story began. Claire Whitfield thought the hardest part was already behind her. The affair, the ugly divorce, the year of hostile lawyers and mutual friends choosing sides. But what she didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until she was helping Sophie clear out the last boxes from storage, was that Elena hadn't stumbled into Daniel's life by chance. Elena had gone looking for him, specifically, deliberately, and the reason went back more than a decade, to a college dorm room neither woman had thought about in years, and a decision Claire made at 20 years old that she never once considered capable of hurting anyone. Sophie found the photograph tucked inside an old shoebox of keepsakes, a faded snapshot of 2 young women laughing in a dorm room, Claire on one side, and on the other, a face Sophie almost didn't recognize without the sharper, more polished features Elena wore now. The woman in the photo was Elena, years before the highlights and the tailored blazers, back when she and Claire had been roommates for a single semester, before Claire transferred schools. Sophie had never heard Claire mention a roommate named Elena, not once in 15 years, and that alone was strange enough to make her start asking questions Claire herself hadn't thought to ask. What Claire eventually pieced together, through a handful of old classmates and one uncomfortable phone call to a woman she barely remembered, painted a picture far darker than a simple coincidence. During that single semester, Elena had been in a relationship with a young man both women knew, a relationship that ended abruptly after Claire, without ever intending to, became closer to him during a group project neither of them saw as anything more than friendship. Elena believed otherwise. She left school shortly after that semester under circumstances she blamed entirely on Claire, convinced that a friendship she trusted had cost her the relationship, and eventually the sense of stability she'd built her entire freshman year around. Claire had genuinely never known any of this until now. For over a decade, Elena carried that resentment quietly, watching from a distance as Claire's life online painted a picture of exactly the kind of happiness Elena felt had been taken from her. When a mutual acquaintance mentioned Daniel's name at a work conference years later, and Elena realized who he was married to, she didn't see coincidence. She saw opportunity. According to two people who knew her during that period, Elena spoke about Claire more than once in the months before she ever met Daniel in person, describing her, in tones that made at least one friend uncomfortable, as someone who owed her something she intended to eventually collect. What looked to Claire like an affair born from loneliness had actually been years in the making, engineered with a patience that made the betrayal feel even colder once she understood it fully. Claire reached out to Elena only once after learning the truth, sending a short message asking why, after everything, she had chosen this particular way to settle a grudge from a life neither of them lived anymore. Elena's response came days later, unapologetic and precise, admitting that she had indeed sought Daniel out on purpose, and that watching Claire's marriage fall apart had given her a sense of closure she said she'd been waiting more than a decade to feel. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply confirmed what Claire had already accepted was true, and in doing so, she gave Claire the one thing she said she'd wanted most from the very beginning, an honest answer, delivered without a single trace of guilt attached to it. For months afterward, Claire struggled to reconcile the two truths sitting side by side in her mind, that she had lost her marriage to a scheme years in the making, and that the man at the center of it had also, in his own selfish way, been exactly who he chose to be the entire time. She stopped blaming herself for missing warning signs that had nothing to do with her original mistake, and started accepting that some people build entire plans around a wound the other person never even knew they'd caused. Healing for Claire meant learning to hold both truths without letting either one define the years still ahead of her. And slowly, almost without noticing, she began rebuilding a version of her life that didn't revolve around either Daniel or the past she could no longer change. It was nearly 8 months after the divorce was finalized that Claire met Michael Bennett, introduced by a coworker at a charity dinner she almost didn't attend. Michael was different in ways that felt immediately noticeable. Patient, where Daniel had been dismissive. Steady, where Daniel had been unpredictable. The kind of man who asked questions and genuinely waited to hear the answers instead of already planning his response. He had been divorced himself years earlier, and early in their relationship, he told Claire plainly that he had watched his own father treat his mother with a carelessness he swore he would never repeat in his own life. That promise, spoken quietly over dinner on their third date, was the first thing that made Claire believe healing with someone new might actually be possible. What neither of them realized during those early months, and what Claire only discovered after their relationship had already grown serious, was that Michael Bennett wasn't simply a successful executive in local real estate development. He was the founder and majority owner of the very company Daniel had worked for throughout their entire marriage, the same company whose late nights and business trips had provided convenient cover for Daniel's affair years earlier. When Michael eventually learned, through casual conversation, exactly who Claire's ex-husband was, the discovery landed with a weight neither of them expected, transforming a private heartbreak into something that would soon reach directly into the office where Daniel had built his entire career. Michael never publicly confirmed the connection between his personal life and Daniel's employment, and he insisted to Claire that his decisions at work would remain separate from what had happened in her marriage. But those close to the company noticed a shift almost immediately. Daniel quietly removed from client accounts he had managed for years, passed over for a promotion he had been promised months earlier, and eventually eased out of the company entirely under the vague explanation of restructuring. Whether it was deliberate or simply the natural consequence of an increasingly uncomfortable situation, Daniel found himself losing not just his marriage and his reputation around town, but the career he had built his entire identity around, all while the man now standing beside his ex-wife rose further into a life Daniel could no longer touch. Claire never asked Michael directly whether Daniel's departure from the company had anything to do with her, and Michael never offered an explanation beyond simple professionalism. What she did know, watching her old life continue to unravel from a comfortable distance, was that for the first time since that October morning years earlier, she wasn't the one left watching from outside a window, wondering what was happening to a life she used to belong to. She had built something new instead, steadier and far more honest than anything she'd known before, standing beside a man who had made her a promise he had clearly intended to keep, even in the moments neither of them realized anyone else might be watching. So we're left with the question this story leaves behind for good. Do you believe some betrayals eventually find their own kind of justice, even without anyone planning for it directly? Or do you think Claire got fortunate in a way most people never do? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if this story stayed with you as much as it stayed with us, stay close, because the next story we're about to share might be the most unforgettable one yet.